What happens when the boss who destroys your career discovers you actually own the company? This is the story of the most satisfying workplace revenge you'll ever hear. If you love stories about justice and family secrets, hit that subscribe button. I promise you won't regret it. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? I love connecting with listeners around the world. The Mont Blanc fountain pen felt heavier than it should have in my trembling fingers. December 22nd, 2023, 4:47 p.m. I'd remember that timestamp forever. The pen's gold nib caught the dying winter light filtering through David Thornfield's corner office windows, 42 floors above Manhattan's pre-Christmas chaos. "Just sign here, Rebecca." David's voice carried that particular blend of smugness and false sympathy he'd perfected over the 3 years I'd worked under him. Standard termination agreement, clean break. I stared at the papers spread across his mahogany desk, my name typed in corporate Arial font next to words like immediate cessation and final compensation. The stale coffee smell from the break room had followed me in here, mixing with David's expensive cologne until my stomach churned. "David, I don't understand." My voice sounded steady, professional. A miracle considering my world had just imploded. My performance reviews were exemplary. The Morrison campaign I designed just brought in $12 million in new revenue. He leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled like he was delivering a sermon rather than destroying someone's career 3 days before Christmas. "Rebecca, sometimes these decisions aren't about performance. They're about fit, cultural fit." The words hit like ice water. I'd heard that phrase before, whispered in corporate bathrooms, code for, "You don't belong here." My mother had scrubbed office buildings to put me through business school. I'd clawed my way up from junior account coordinator to marketing director, working 80-hour weeks while others networked at country clubs I couldn't afford to join. "Is this about the Hartwell presentation?" I asked, though I already knew. Last month, I'd watched David present my strategy deck to the board, my months of research repackaged with his name on every slide. When I'd privately questioned him about credit, he'd smiled that same cold smile he was wearing now. "This isn't about any single project, Rebecca. It's about loyalty, team dynamics." David's pen clicked against his teeth, a nervous tell I'd cataloged during countless meetings where he'd stolen my ideas. "You'll receive 3-month severance, full benefits through March." Very generous. Generous. The word tasted bitter. 3 years of my life, of building campaigns that made his reputation, reduced to a line item in his budget. I pressed the Mont Blanc's tip to the signature line, watching ink bloom across the page like blood from a wound. "You know what's interesting, David?" I kept my tone conversational as I signed my name with deliberate care. "In all the time I've worked here, you've never once asked about my family." Something flickered across his face, too quick to interpret. "Family isn't really relevant to business, is it?" The pen felt impossibly cold between my fingers as I set it down. I'd bought it with my first bonus, a symbol of having made it in corporate America. Now it was signing my exit papers. Maybe not. I gathered my purse, leaving the pen on his desk like a surrender flag. "Thank you for the opportunity, David. I've learned so much about corporate culture." I was halfway to the door when his voice stopped me, soft as silk and twice as dangerous. "Rebecca." When I turned, David was studying the termination papers with an expression I couldn't read. "Family loyalty is everything in this business. Some people understand that. Others," he shrugged, letting the implication hang in the air like smoke. "Others never quite learn where they belong." The elevator doors closed behind me with a soft ding, carrying me down from the clouds to street level, where Christmas shoppers hurried past in wool coats, an optimism I no longer shared. As Manhattan's lights blurred through my tears, I couldn't shake the feeling that David's parting words weren't just cruel. They were a warning. But a warning about what? Christmas Eve arrived like a cruel joke. While families gathered around trees laden with presents, I sat in my studio apartment, staring at rejection emails and a bank account that wouldn't stretch past February. The city sparkled below my window, but the magic felt hollow. The knock at my door came at 7:23 p.m., precise, authoritative. I expected a neighbor or delivery driver, not the elegant woman in her 70s standing in my hallway, wrapped in cashmere and carrying herself like she owned Manhattan. "Rebecca Martinez?" Her voice held traces of an accent I couldn't place, cultured and careful. "My name is Eleanor Martinez Thornfield. I believe we need to talk." The hyphenated name hit me like cold wind. Martinez Thornfield. The company letterhead I'd stared at for 3 years bore that exact combination, though I'd never connected my surname to the corporate founding family. "I don't understand," I said, but something in her steel gray eyes, Familiar eyes, like looking in a mirror through decades, made me step aside. Eleanor glided into my cramped space with the grace of someone accustomed to grander rooms. She paused at my tiny kitchen table, studying the termination papers I'd left scattered there like evidence of my failure. David Thornfield terminated your employment yesterday. It wasn't a question. 3 years of exceptional work, dismissed with 3-month severance. How do you know about? Because I've been watching your career, Rebecca. Every promotion, every campaign, every stolen idea that man claimed as his own. Eleanor's fingers traced the edge of my termination letter, particularly the Morrison campaign. $12 million in revenue from a strategy that bore his signature, but carried your brilliance. The room felt smaller suddenly. Airless. I'm sorry, but who exactly are you? Eleanor moved to my window, gazing out at the city lights like a queen surveying her kingdom. 47 years ago, I fell in love with a boy from East Harlem named Carlos Martinez. My father, founder of what became Martinez Thornfield Enterprises, disapproved. Said Carlos was beneath our station. My breath caught. Carlos Martinez, my father's name, though he'd left when I was 5 and never looked back. I married Carlos anyway, Eleanor continued, her voice softening with memory. We had a son, James, your father. She turned from the window, and in the lamplight, I could see the resemblance, the stubborn jawline, the way she held her shoulders when delivering difficult news. My father abandoned us. The words came out sharper than intended. He walked out on Christmas morning when I was 5 years old. Never sent a card, never called. Eleanor's face crumpled slightly. He didn't abandon you, mija. I forced him away. The Spanish endearment, the same one my mother used, hit me like a physical blow. I sank into my kitchen chair, the termination papers crinkling beneath my elbows. James fell in love with your mother, wanted to marry her, give you his name properly. But David's father, Richard Thornfield, he was my business partner by then, and he knew about Carlos, about our unconventional beginning. He threatened to expose old family scandals, destroy the company we'd built, unless I kept James in line. The pieces clicked together like a puzzle solving itself. The Christmas flowers. Every year, my mother receives white roses with a card signed E.M. She never told me who sent them. White roses were your father's favorite. He said they represented new beginnings. Eleanor reached into her purse, withdrawing a photograph. My father at 25, holding a baby that must have been me. Both of us laughing at something outside the frame. I've sent those flowers every Christmas for 28 years, hoping somehow they'd bring you back to us. But David fired me. If you've been watching, David Thornfield is Richard's son, and he's inherited his father's talent for manipulation. Eleanor's voice hardened. 3 weeks ago, our private investigator discovered David has been embezzling funds from the company, using your projects as cover. When he learned I was finally ready to bring you home, to reveal your heritage, he moved first. The weight of betrayal settled deeper. Not just fired, targeted. Eliminated before I could discover what was rightfully mine. Eleanor opened her purse again, withdrawing something that made my heart stop. The Montblanc fountain pen I'd left on David's desk, its gold surface gleaming in my apartment's harsh light. He had the audacity to keep this, she said, placing it in my palm. It belonged to your grandfather, my father, Eduardo Martinez. He signed the incorporation papers for Martinez Thornfield Enterprises with this pen in 1952. The pen felt different now, not cold, but warm, pulsing with history. I traced the engravings I'd never noticed before. E.M. 1952, etched in flowing script along the barrel. David knows about my connection to the company. For 3 years, he's known. Richard told him before he died. Insurance against any attempt I might make to reclaim our family's legacy. Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes blazing. But there's something David doesn't know. Something I've been preparing for decades. She reached into her coat, withdrawing a thick manila envelope sealed with red wax. The words contingency plan were written across the front in bold letters, along with a date. Execute if necessary, Christmas Eve 2023. What is this? Eleanor's smile held 50 years of patience and strategy. Justice, mija, and your birthright. As she broke the wax seal, I heard the grandfather clock in the building's lobby chime midnight. Christmas Day had arrived, but instead of gifts and carols, I was about to receive something far more valuable and dangerous. The first document in the envelope bore the letterhead of Manhattan's most prestigious law firm. The second was a forensic audit report dated just 2 weeks ago. The third was a stock certificate with my father's name on it, signed by Eduardo Martinez himself. But it was the fourth document that made my hands tremble. A board meeting notice scheduled for January 15, 2024, with my name listed not as a terminated employee, but as Martinez Estate Representative. What happens on January 15th? I whispered. Eleanor's eyes glittered like winter stars. David Thornfield discovers he never actually worked for his father's company. He worked for mine. The documents spread across my kitchen table like tarot cards revealing an impossible future. Eleanor sat across from me, her manicured fingers organizing papers with the precision of someone who'd spent decades planning this moment. Your grandfather was brilliant but naive about business partners, she began, sliding the stock certificate toward me. When he incorporated Martinez Thornfield Enterprises in 1952, he gave Richard Thornfield exactly 49%. Eduardo Martinez retained 51%. Controlling interest. I traced my father's name on the certificate with the Mont Blanc's tip. But if my father died without children, James didn't die, mija. He's living in Phoenix under the name James Martin, working as a high school teacher. I've been sending him money for years through a trust, keeping him away from New York to protect him from the Thornfields. Her voice carried the weight of decades of regret. And you. When you were born, that 51% became yours through bloodline inheritance. The room spun slightly. Outside, Christmas carols drifted up from the street, a surreal soundtrack to the corporate dynasty I was apparently heir to. David knows about the inheritance. David knows about your bloodline, but he doesn't know about the stock structure. Richard never told him the full truth. Thought he could manipulate the situation indefinitely. Eleanor pulled out another document, this one thick with legal seals. 3 years ago, when you started at the company, I had our attorneys prepare this contingency plan. If anyone in the Thornfield family ever moved against you professionally... She paused, letting me read the legal terminology that essentially boiled down to corporate war. I would have full legal authority to call an emergency board meeting and reveal your ownership stake. The forensic audit report made my stomach clench. Pages of financial records showing systematic fund transfers, falsified expense reports, and, most damning, several contracts with my forged signature authorizing payments to shell companies David had created. He's been stealing money and making it look like I approved it. $12 million over 3 years. David planned to fire you and then discover the fraud, painting you as the mastermind who fled with company funds. Eleanor's voice turned arctic. He underestimated how closely I've been watching. I set down the pen, my hand shaking. Why now? Why reveal all this on Christmas Eve? Eleanor reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. Her skin felt papery but warm, like old books left in sunlight. Because tomorrow, David thinks he's safe. Tomorrow, he thinks he's eliminated the one threat to his father's legacy. But tomorrow, I want you to understand exactly who you are before we take back what's ours. The documents painted a picture of elaborate deception spanning decades. The Thornfields had systematically marginalized the Martinez name, rebranding the company's public face while secretly knowing they were minority partners. David's father had convinced Eleanor to stay quiet by threatening to destroy James's life, to drag the family through public scandal. But James is safe now. James is protected. And you, Eleanor smiled, the expression transforming her face from regal to grandmotherly. You're about to become the most powerful woman on Wall Street. My phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Martinez, this is Marcus Chen from Patterson, Chen & Associates. Mrs. Martinez Thornfield asked me to reach out. Can we meet December 26th to discuss the January 15th presentation? Time is of the essence. Eleanor noticed my surprised expression. Marcus has been our family attorney for 25 years. He's been waiting almost as long as I have for this day. I stared at the Mont Blanc pen in my palm, its weight now feeling like responsibility, rather than burden. My grandfather's hands had held this same pen when he built an empire. My father had held it when he signed away his future to protect mine. Now it was mine, along with secrets that could destroy careers and legacies. What happens to the people who work there? The honest employees who have nothing to do with David's schemes? Eleanor's expression softened. That's exactly what your grandfather would have asked. The company will be stronger without David's corruption. The employees will be safer with proper leadership. She gathered the documents back into the envelope, but left the stock certificate on the table. My name and birthright printed in formal legal text. January 15th is in 3 weeks. David will call an emergency board meeting, thinking he's consolidating power after removing you. Instead, he'll discover that the woman he fired 3 days before Christmas owns the company he thought he inherited. As Eleanor prepared to leave, she paused at my door, her hand on the frame. Misha, there's one more thing David doesn't know. The locked drawer in his desk, the one he checks obsessively when he thinks no one is looking. My pulse quickened. I'd noticed that habit during every meeting, the way his fingers would drift to the bottom drawer of his mahogany desk, checking that it was secure. "What's in it?" Eleanor's smile turned predatory. Copies of every email he sent to his accomplices, every forged document, every piece of evidence we need to bury him. She pulled out a small silver key. "Security gave me this years ago when I still had building access. Richard never thought to revoke my clearance when he forced me into retirement. The key felt warm in my palm, like the pen. Another piece of my inheritance. Tomorrow night, when David's at his parents' house in the Hamptons celebrating his victory over the Martinez bloodline, you and I are going to visit his office and collect the evidence he's been so carefully guarding." Christmas night in Manhattan's financial district felt like walking through a ghost town. The towering glass monuments to capitalism stood empty, their windows dark except for the occasional security light casting long shadows across abandoned desks. Eleanor moved through the marble lobby of Martinez Thornfield Enterprises like she owned the place, which I was still adjusting to the reality she essentially did. The night security guard, a portly man in his 60s, barely looked up from his crossword puzzle. "Evening, Mrs. Martinez Thornfield. Working late on Christmas? Just retrieving some files, Roberto. My granddaughter will be helping me." Eleanor's tone was casual, grandmother-like, giving no hint that we were about to commit what technically constituted breaking and entering. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt eternal. Eleanor stood perfectly composed beside me, but I could smell her lavender perfume mixing with my own nervous sweat. The Mont Blanc pen felt heavy in my coat pocket, like it was pulling me toward something inevitable. "Second thoughts?" Eleanor asked as the elevator dinged our arrival. "About a dozen, but not about this." David's corner office door stood like a fortress in the dim hallway. Eleanor produced the silver key with the flourish of a magician revealing the final trick. "Your grandfather always said that guilty men make the mistake of keeping evidence too close," she whispered as the lock clicked open. "Richard did the same thing. Never trusted banks or safe deposit boxes. Always kept his secrets within arm's reach." The office looked different in the darkness. David's mahogany desk loomed larger, more imposing, but also more vulnerable. The locked bottom drawer sat there like a treasure chest waiting to be opened. Eleanor handed me the key. "Your inheritance, mija. Your justice to claim. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, there's so much more coming. Don't forget to hit the bell for notifications." The drawer slid open with surprising ease, revealing manila folders organized with obsessive care. David's handwriting labeled each one: Martinez Research, forged authorizations, shell company records, and most chilling, contingency, frame RM. I pulled out the Rebecca Martinez file with hands that had steadied with purpose. Inside were printouts of every email I'd ever sent, annotated in David's precise handwriting with notes like, "useful for false narrative," and "potential liability admission." Worse were the documents I'd never seen before. Contracts bearing my forged signature, authorizing payments to companies I'd never heard of. "Sophisticated," Eleanor murmured, photographing each page with her phone. Richard trained him well in the art of corporate manipulation, but it was the final folder that made my blood freeze. Project Heritage contained surveillance photos of me, leaving my apartment, entering coffee shops, meeting with clients. Photos dating back 3 years, since my first day at the company. He's been watching me this entire time. Eleanor's jaw tightened as she flipped through images of me at my mother's birthday dinner, at my college roommate's wedding, at the gym on Saturday mornings. "He knew exactly who you were from the moment you applied for the job." A memo paperclip to the photos bore David's letterhead and yesterday's date. Phase 1 complete. RM terminated without incident. Phase 2. Plant evidence of embezzlement in her personal files. Phase 3. Anonymous tip to SEC regarding missing funds. Timeline. Complete by January 10th, well before any potential board challenges. The calculated cruelty of it stole my breath. David hadn't just fired me. He'd orchestrated an elaborate frame job designed to destroy any chance I had of fighting back. "There's more," Eleanor said grimly, pulling out a thick folder labeled Thornfield Communications Confidential. The emails inside painted a picture of systematic corruption spanning years. Communications between David and various shell company executives, instructions for moving money through offshore accounts, and most damning, conversations with a forensic accountant about how to make embezzlement charges against an employee stick in court. But the final email, sent just hours after my termination, made everything clear. To Richard.Thornfield.Trustacayman Holdings, com. From D. Thornfield, A. Martinez Thornfield. Com subject. Heritage problem solved. Sent December 22, 2023, 6:47 p.m. R. The Martinez girl is eliminated. Severance agreement signed, non-compete in place. Planted evidence will surface after New Year. SEC contact confirmed. Investigation will begin by January 12th. She'll be facing federal charges before she can cause any problems about bloodlines or inheritance. The company remains secure. Recommend proceeding with IPO plans for Q2. With RM neutralized, no one can challenge the Thornfield majority narrative. David Eleanor photographed the email with hands that trembled slightly. The first sign of emotion I'd seen from her all evening. IPO plans, she whispered. They're planning to take the company public, selling shares based on fraudulent ownership claims. I sank into David's leather chair, overwhelmed by the scope of the conspiracy. This wasn't just about firing me. It was about stealing my family's legacy and selling it to the highest bidder while I sat in federal prison for crimes I didn't commit. The timeline makes sense now, I said, pieces clicking together. Fire me, December 22nd. Plant evidence over the holidays while everyone's distracted. Trigger the SEC investigation by January 12th. Announce the IPO once I'm facing charges. Eleanor closed the final folder and looked at me with something approaching pride. But they made one critical error. What's that? She smiled, the expression sharp as winter wind. They assumed I would let them destroy my granddaughter the way they destroyed my son. She gathered the evidence folders into her oversized purse. January 15th isn't just a board meeting, Mija. It's the day the Thornfield family discovers that their 40-year reign of manipulation is over. As we prepared to leave David's office, I noticed something else in the drawer. A small velvet box tucked behind the files. Inside was a ring, clearly expensive, with an engagement setting that sparkled even in the dim light. Eleanor's expression darkened. David's been planning to propose to someone. Probably wants to solidify his social position before the IPO. I pocketed the ring, a small act of rebellion that felt surprisingly satisfying. Let him try to explain to his girlfriend why her Christmas surprise had vanished. We left the office exactly as we'd found it, except for the missing evidence that would soon transform from David's insurance policy into his confession. The elevator carried us down through the building's silent floors, past the dreams and schemes of 1,000 corporate climbers who had no idea that by January 15th, everything they thought they knew about power in this building would change. As we walked through the lobby, Roberto looked up from his crossword. Find what you were looking for, Mrs. Martinez Thornfield. Eleanor's smile could have illuminated Times Square. Everything I needed, Roberto. And quite a bit more. December 26th arrived gray and cold, the kind of New York winter morning that made expensive coats feel inadequate. Marcus Chen's law office occupied the entire 53rd floor of a gleaming tower in Midtown, the kind of address that whispered power and old money. I clutched the Mont Blanc pen in my coat pocket as the elevator climbed, its familiar weight now feeling like a talisman. Eleanor sat beside me, perfectly composed in her charcoal wool suit, but I could sense the tension radiating from her like heat from a furnace. Marcus has been waiting for this day almost as long as I have, she murmured as we approached the 53rd floor. 25 years of preparation, Mija. Every legal strategy, every contingency plan, every piece of documentation, all leading to January 15th. The elevator doors opened to reveal a reception area that belonged in a museum. Persian rugs, mahogany paneling, and oil portraits of distinguished men in judicial robes. But it was the woman behind the reception desk who caught my attention. She looked up from her computer with eyes that held the same intelligence I'd seen in Eleanor's. Mrs. Martinez Thornfield, Ms. Martinez, Mr. Chen is expecting you. Marcus Chen rose from behind a desk the size of my entire kitchen, extending a hand that radiated quiet confidence. Mid-50s, impeccably dressed, with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades turning legal theory into corporate reality. Rebecca. His voice carried warmth beneath its professional precision. I've been looking forward to this meeting since you were 5 years old. The conference room overlooked Central Park, but I barely noticed the view. The table was covered with documents that represented 25 years of meticulous planning, corporate charters, stock certificates, trust agreements, and what looked like a complete forensic analysis of Martinez Thornfield Enterprises' financial structure. Before we discuss strategy, Marcus began, settling into his chair with the ease of someone accustomed to high-stakes negotiations, I need you to understand exactly what you're inheriting, Rebecca. He slid a bound report across the table. The cover bore the logo of one of Manhattan's most prestigious forensic accounting firms, dated just 3 weeks ago. Your grandfather, Eduardo, was more than a visionary. He was a strategic genius. When he incorporated Martinez Thornfield Enterprises in 1952, he didn't just retain controlling interest. He structured the ownership in a way that protected the Martinez bloodline in perpetuity. The financial documents painted a picture that made my head spin. The company wasn't just profitable, it was a gold mine that the Thornfields had been systematically looting for decades, while believing they were entitled to the spoils. Current market valuation, $847 million, Marcus continued, his tone matter-of-fact as if he were discussing the weather. Your controlling interest represents $432 million in assets, not including the trust funds Eduardo established for his descendants. Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. Show her the Thornfield projections, Marcus. Another folder, this one containing David's internal communications about the IPO timeline. The numbers were staggering. David planned to take the company public at a valuation of over $2 billion, selling shares based on the fraudulent claim that the Thornfield family held majority ownership. They're not just stealing from you, Marcus explained. They're planning to steal from thousands of future investors by misrepresenting the ownership structure. I traced the Mont Blanc's outline through my coat fabric, grounding myself in its solid reality. What happens on January 15th? Marcus's smile could have illuminated the conference room. David has called an emergency board meeting, ostensibly to announce quarterly results and discuss IPO preparations. He believes he's consolidating power after eliminating you as a potential threat. Instead, you'll walk into that boardroom as the rightful majority owner, armed with evidence of systematic fraud, embezzlement, and securities violations that could send David to federal prison for 20 years. Eleanor opened her purse, withdrawing the evidence folders we'd collected from David's office. Marcus examined each document with the precision of a surgeon, occasionally nodding or making notes in the margins. The forged signatures alone constitute multiple felonies, he murmured, photographing a particularly damning contract. But the email communications about framing you for embezzlement that transforms this from corporate malfeasance to criminal conspiracy. The scope of David's crimes felt overwhelming. 3 years of calculated manipulation, surveillance, and theft, all designed to eliminate me before I could discover my heritage. What about the other board members? I asked. Surely some of them are complicit. Marcus consulted another file. We've done deep background checks on all 7 board members. 3 are Thornfield allies who likely know about the ownership fraud. 2 are independent directors who've been kept in the dark. 1 is Eleanor's appointee, a Harvard Business School professor named Dr. Sarah Williamson, who's been waiting years for this revelation. And the 7th? Eleanor's smile turned predatory. The 7th seat has been vacant since Richard Thornfield's death last year. According to the corporate charter, that seat belongs to the Martinez family representative. She gestured toward me. You. The realization hit like a physical blow. Not only was I the majority shareholder, I was also entitled to a board seat that had been deliberately kept empty to prevent my participation. Marcus spread out a timeline on the conference table, marking key dates with military precision. January 8th. We file official notification of your board appointment and majority ownership claim. January 12th. We simultaneously notify the SEC about David's planned securities fraud and provide evidence of the embezzlement scheme. January 15th? I whispered. January 15th. David walks into that boardroom expecting to announce his IPO triumph. Instead, he discovers that federal investigators are already examining his financial records, and the woman he fired 3 weeks ago is now his boss. Eleanor reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. Mija, you need to understand something. This isn't just about money or revenge. David's IPO scheme would have destroyed your grandfather's legacy, cheated thousands of investors, and made the Thornfields billionaires through fraud. I pulled the Mont Blanc pen from my pocket, setting it on the conference table where it caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows. The gold nib gleamed like a promise. My grandfather signed the incorporation papers with this pen, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. Marcus nodded reverently. And on January 15th, you'll use it to sign the documents that restore your family's rightful control of the company he built. The weight of inherited responsibility settled on my shoulders, not crushing, but empowering. I wasn't just reclaiming stolen money. I was honoring my grandfather's vision, protecting innocent investors, and ensuring that David's crimes finally faced consequences. What do we need from me between now and January 15th? Marcus's expression grew serious. Absolute discretion. David can't know we have the evidence or that you've discovered your heritage. One wrong move and he'll destroy documents, flee the jurisdiction, or accelerate his IPO timeline. Eleanor gathered the papers with practiced efficiency. For the next 19 days, your unemployed Rebecca Martinez, struggling to find work after an unfair termination. Let David think he's won. As we prepared to leave Marcus's office, he handed me a business card with emergency contact numbers. Rebecca, if David or anyone from the Thornfield organization contacts you for any reason, no matter how innocent it seems, call me immediately. We're in the endgame now, and desperate people make dangerous decisions. The elevator carried us down through 53 floors of Manhattan power brokers, but I felt like I was ascending rather than descending. In 19 days, I would walk into that boardroom carrying the weight of my grandfather's legacy and the power to deliver justice that had been decades in the making. David Thornfield had no idea what was coming for him. January 8, 2024. The phone call came at 6:47 a.m., jarring me from the first peaceful sleep I'd had in weeks. My mother's voice was tight with worry. Rebecca, there's a man outside asking about you. Says he's from your old company. I bolted upright, instantly alert. Through my mother's kitchen window in Queens, I could see a black sedan parked across the street. Too expensive for the neighborhood. Too obvious to be surveillance. Don't answer the door, Mom. I'm on my way. 20 minutes later, I watched from behind her curtains as David Thornfield himself emerged from the sedan, his usually immaculate appearance slightly rumpled. He'd never come to Queens before. Never acknowledged that people like me lived in places like this. His presence here meant only one thing: desperation. My phone buzzed with Marcus Chen's emergency number. I answered on the first ring. Rebecca, we have a problem. David filed for an expedited board meeting this morning. Moved it up from January 15th to January 10th. Something spooked him. Through the window, I watched David approach my mother's front door, his movements sharp with agitation. When she didn't answer, he cupped his hands against the glass, peering inside like a man searching for salvation. He's at my mother's house right now. Do not engage with him. We're not ready for an early confrontation. Our SEC filing isn't complete, and the forensic audit needs 2 more days. Marcus's voice carried an edge I hadn't heard before. Can you get somewhere safe? David's phone rang, and I watched him answer with the sharp gesture of a man barely holding on to control. Even from across the street, his agitation was visible. Pacing steps, hand through his hair, the nervous tick of checking his coat pocket where he usually kept his keys. Rebecca? My mother appeared beside me, her face etched with concern. What's happening? Just some workplace drama, Mom. We need to leave for a few hours. As we gathered her purse and coat, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Rebecca, this is David Thornfield. We need to talk immediately. There's been a misunderstanding about your termination. I can offer you your job back with a promotion. Call me. The desperation in those words was palpable. David Thornfield, who'd fired me 3 days before Christmas, was now offering promotions. Whatever he'd discovered had shaken him to his core. Another text followed immediately. I know we had differences, but I'm prepared to make things right. Significant compensation increase. Partnership track. Call me within the hour. I showed the messages to my mother as we slipped out her back door. Her eyes widened at the phone number. The same number that had appeared on company emails for 3 years. This is your boss? The one who fired you? Former boss. And yes, the same one. We drove to Eleanor's brownstone, my hands steady on the wheel despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. The Mont Blanc pen sat in my purse like a touchstone, reminding me that this panic meant we were winning. Eleanor opened her door before I could knock, her expression grim. Marcus called. David's moving faster than we anticipated. She ushered us inside, immediately embracing my mother with the warmth of someone who'd wanted to meet her granddaughter-in-law for decades. Carmen, I'm so sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. My mother stared at Eleanor with recognition dawning. The Christmas roses. You're the one who's been sending them. Every year for 28 years, Eleanor confirmed softly. I should have introduced myself sooner. While they talked, my phone rang again. David's number. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message with Eleanor and my mother flanking me. Rebecca, this is urgent. I've reviewed your termination, and I believe there were irregularities in the process. I'm prepared to offer you a senior director position, effective immediately, with backdated compensation for the time you've been away. Please call me. We can resolve this today. Eleanor's laugh was sharp as winter wind. He knows. How much does he know? Enough to panic, not enough to run. She moved to her desk, withdrawing a thick folder. Marcus received this from our private investigator an hour ago. David spent all weekend at his office going through files. Security cameras show him there until 4 a.m. Sunday night. The surveillance photos showed David in his office, clearly agitated, surrounded by papers and open drawers. In one image, he was holding up what looked like empty file folders to the light, as if the documents might materialize through sheer will. He knows the evidence is gone, I said, but he doesn't know who took it or what we plan to do with it. Eleanor's smile was predatory. He's operating blind, trying to neutralize you before you can become a threat he doesn't fully understand. My phone buzzed with another text. Rebecca, I'm at your mother's house. I just want to talk. There are opportunities we should discuss. I can wait. The image of David Thornfield sitting in his expensive car outside my mother's modest Queens home was both absurd and sinister. The corporate prince forced to venture into the kingdom of the working class, searching for a woman who held the keys to his destruction. He's still there, my mother said, checking the security app on her phone, just sitting in his car like some kind of stalker. Eleanor moved to her window, gazing out at the city with the expression of a general surveying a battlefield. David's father made the same mistake, assuming that desperation would make us reckless. Instead, it's making him sloppy. What happens if he forces the board meeting before we're ready? Then we improvise. You walk into that room as the rightful owner, whether we have every piece of documentation perfect or not. Eleanor turned from the window, her eyes blazing with 50 years of accumulated strategy. But there's something David doesn't know about the January 10th timeline. She handed me another document, this one bearing the seal of the Securities and Exchange Commission, dated this morning. While David was sitting outside your mother's house playing corporate stalker, Marcus filed an emergency injunction. Any board meeting or corporate decision made while fraud allegations are under federal investigation is automatically invalid. The document was beautiful in its legal precision, essentially freezing David's ability to make any moves until the investigation was complete. He could call all the emergency meetings he wanted, but they would carry no legal weight. So January 10th becomes theater? January 10th becomes justice. Eleanor smiled, the expression transforming her face from aristocratic to vindictive. David will walk into that boardroom thinking he's consolidating power. Instead, he'll discover he's confessing his crimes to federal investigators. My phone rang again. David's number. This time I answered. Rebecca. His voice carried a forced cheer that couldn't mask the underlying panic. I'm so glad you picked up. Listen, I think we got off on the wrong foot. I'd like to make you an offer. What kind of offer, David? Senior vice president, marketing division, your own budget, your own team. We can start fresh. I let silence stretch between us, enjoying the sound of his increasingly labored breathing. That's very generous, I said finally. But I'm curious. What's changed since December 22nd when you told me I didn't have the right cultural fit? Sometimes we make hasty decisions. I've had time to reconsider, and I believe you have unique value to the company. Unique value? The phrase was loaded with meaning. He knew something about my heritage, but not everything. I'll need to think about it, David. Of course, but Rebecca... His voice dropped, taking on an edge of desperation. I really think we should meet today. There are things we need to discuss. Family things. The word hung in the air like a threat. Family. He was showing his hand, revealing that he knew about my connection to the Martinez bloodline. What kind of family things, David? The kind best discussed in person. I'm at your mother's house. Lovely neighborhood, by the way. Why don't you come by? We can drive back to Manhattan together. Hash this all out. The image of David sitting outside my childhood home, using it as leverage, crystallized my resolve. This wasn't just about money or corporate power. This was about a man who thought he could intimidate working-class families to protect his stolen empire. I'll call you back, I said, and hung up. Eleanor had been listening to every word, her expression growing more satisfied with each exchange. He's terrified, she said simply. Men like David are only dangerous when they're confident. Desperate men make mistakes. Outside Eleanor's windows, Manhattan glittered in the afternoon sun, unaware that its most significant corporate dynasty was about to change hands. In 2 days, David Thornfield would discover that the woman he'd spent 3 years surveilling, the employee he'd fired 3 days before Christmas, the threat he'd tried to eliminate through fraud and manipulation, owned the company he thought he'd inherited. The Mont Blanc pen seemed to pulse in my purse, warm with the weight of inherited justice. January 10th, 2024. The 42nd floor conference room felt different at 9 a.m., electric with tension, like the air before a thunderstorm. I stood outside the mahogany doors, the Mont Blanc pen warm in my palm, listening to David's voice through the glass as he addressed the emergency board meeting he'd called in desperation. Significant changes in company structure that require immediate attention. As you know, we've eliminated certain redundancies in our marketing division. Eleanor squeezed my shoulder. Ready, Misha? Marcus nodded from beside us, his briefcase containing enough evidence to destroy David's life 3 times over. Behind him stood 2 federal investigators, their presence a stark reminder that this wasn't just corporate theater. This was justice. I pushed open the conference room doors. 7 faces turned toward me, but only David's mattered. His confident expression crumbled like paper in fire, color draining from his face as he registered not just my presence, but Eleanor's, Marcus's, and the federal badges that followed us into the room. Rebecca, Dr. Sarah Williamson, the Harvard professor Eleanor had mentioned, half rose from her seat. "What are you doing here?" "David said you'd been terminated." "I was terminated," I said, my voice carrying across the room with surprising steadiness. 3 days before Christmas, by a man who's been stealing from this company for 3 years, while planning to frame me for his crimes. David's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. His hand moved instinctively to his coat pocket. The same nervous gesture I'd catalogued during countless meetings, but found nothing. The engagement ring he'd kept there was sitting in my purse, another small trophy of his hubris. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, his voice filling the room with legal authority, "I'm Marcus Chen, representing the Martinez family estate. These are Special Agents Rodriguez and Kim from the SEC's Fraud Investigation Unit." The silence stretched like piano wire ready to snap. Board members exchanged glances, confusion mixing with dawning horror as the implications became clear. "I don't understand," whispered James Morrison, the independent director whose $12 million account I'd secured. "Martinez family estate?" Eleanor stepped forward, every inch the matriarch she'd always been. "My name is Eleanor Martinez Thornfield. My father, Eduardo Martinez, founded this company in 1952, with 51% controlling interest. That ownership passed to my son James, and upon his departure from New York, to his daughter." She gestured toward me with regal grace. "Rebecca Martinez, the rightful majority owner of Martinez Thornfield Enterprises." David finally found his voice, though it came out as a croak. "That's impossible. Rebecca is she's nobody. An employee. A marketing director. A marketing director you fired after she discovered your embezzlement scheme." Agent Rodriguez interjected, opening her tablet to display David's emails. "Mr. Thornfield, you're under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud." The room erupted. Board members shouted questions, chairs scraped against marble floors, and David's face went from pale to gray as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. But I only had eyes for the Mont Blanc pen in my hand, my grandfather's pen, waiting for this moment for 72 years. Marcus spread documents across the conference table with practiced efficiency. Stock certificates, trust agreements, forensic audit reports, and David's own incriminating emails created a paper trail of undeniable truth. The evidence shows systematic theft of $12.7 million over 3 years. Marcus announced to the stunned board, "Mr. Thornfield created shell companies, forged Ms. Martinez's signatures, and planned to trigger a federal investigation against her to cover his crimes." Dr. H.U. Williamson stared at the documents, her academic mind processing the legal implications. "Rebecca, you're saying you own 51% of this company?" "I'm saying my grandfather built this company, and David's family has been stealing from mine for 40 years. I moved to the head of the conference table, David's chair, though it had never truly been his. But more importantly, I'm saying it's time to restore honest leadership." As federal agents led David from the room, he twisted back toward me, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. "You can't do this! You're nobody! Nobody!" His voice echoed off the marble walls as the elevator doors closed, cutting off his protests mid-sentence. The most powerful man in my professional world, reduced to screaming denials as justice finally caught up with decades of manipulation. Eleanor placed the partnership agreement on the table before me, the document that would officially restore Martinez family control. My hands trembling slightly, I uncapped the Mont Blanc pen and pressed its gold nib to the signature line. The ink flowed like liquid history, my name joining my grandfather's in the corporate legacy he'd built from nothing. Rebecca Martinez, not as the discarded employee David had tried to destroy, but as the rightful heir to an empire built on innovation rather than theft. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, addressing the remaining board members who sat in shocked silence, "we have work to do. This company will honor its original values, merit over manipulation, innovation over intimidation, and justice over favoritism." The transformation wasn't just corporate, it was personal. The woman who'd signed termination papers 3 weeks ago with this same pen had believed her worth was determined by others' validation. The woman signing these documents understood that her value came from heritage, hard work, and the courage to demand justice when systems failed. 6 months later, Martinez Thornfield Enterprises announced record profits under new leadership. David Thornfield was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $47 million in restitution. The company's stock price, which had been mysteriously declining during his embezzlement years, soared to historic highs. But the most satisfying moment came when I used my grandfather's pen to sign the first contract with my name printed as Rebecca Martinez, Chief Executive Officer. Not because someone else decided I belonged, but because I knew I did. What would you have done in Rebecca's shoes? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for listening to the end.